The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems, its desperate signal carrying the weight of impending catastrophe. In the Grand Council chambers of Nexus Prime, representatives from the galaxy's most powerful civilizations gathered around the holographic display that showed their collective doom approaching. Admiral Zixthara of the Zephyrian Empire stood before the assembly, her crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the ominous red glow of the tactical display. Her forearms gestured at the swirling mass of data that painted a picture of unprecedented destruction heading toward the Kepler confluence, home to over 40 billion souls across 12 different species. "The Devourer grows stronger with each system it consumes," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of desperation. "Our most advanced warships cannot even approach within a light year before their hulls begin to dissolve. The energy signatures suggest it's not just consuming matter, but reality itself." Kethmore, the ancient representative of the crystalline collective, pulsed with deep blue uncertainty. His kind had witnessed the birth and death of stars, had solved cosmic mysteries that predated most civilizations, yet even their vast intellect seemed inadequate. "Our mathematical models indicate a 73% probability of total galactic consumption within 6 standard rotations. We have calculated over 14 million possible solutions. None exceed a 12% success rate." The chamber filled with the sounds of despair, crystalline chimes of fear, the grinding of stone-like beings shifting nervously, and the electrical humming of energy-based life forms fluctuating with anxiety. For 3 days, the greatest minds in the galaxy had struggled with this unprecedented threat, and each hour brought them closer to accepting the unthinkable, that this might be the end of everything they had built over millions of years. The Devourer had appeared without warning in the Outer Rim territories, initially mistaken for a natural phenomenon. It was only when the research station at Helios 7 vanished completely, not destroyed, but simply erased from existence as if it had never been, that the true horror became apparent. This wasn't a weapon or a natural disaster. It was something that consumed the very fabric of space-time itself, growing larger and more powerful with each planet, each star, each piece of reality it absorbed. As the debate continued, a small notification chimed on the communications console. The junior technician, a nervous Vorthak named Siltender, hesitated before speaking. "Honored representatives, we're receiving a transmission from the Sol System." A collective pause filled the chamber. The Sol System, barely 2 centuries since first contact, a single-planet species that had only recently developed faster than light travel. They were known for their curiosity and their strange habit of sending messages of goodwill, but in matters of galactic importance, they were considered little more than observers. "They're requesting permission to address the assembly," Siltender continued, his tentacles quivering with uncertainty. Admiral Zixthara's optical sensors flickered with what might have been amusement in less dire circumstances. The humans? What could they possibly contribute to this crisis? They haven't even developed quantum phase weaponry, but Elder Mordain of the Vorthak Confederation raised one ancient hand. At nearly 8,000 years old, he had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. In times of desperation, wisdom may come from unexpected sources. The holographic display shimmered, and suddenly the chamber was looking at Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Perseverance. She appeared unremarkable by galactic standards. No crystalline enhancements, no energy manipulation abilities, no obvious signs of advanced evolution. Just a middle-aged human in a simple blue uniform standing on what appeared to be a cramped bridge with primitive displays flickering behind her. "Honored representatives," Captain Shen began, her voice clear and steady despite the vast distance and the gravity of the situation. "We've been monitoring the crisis in the Kepler confluence. We know our species is young by galactic standards, and our technology is primitive compared to yours, but we'd like to help." Dr. Kethmore pulsed with what might have been polite condescension. "Captain Chen, we appreciate your concern, but this threat is beyond conventional understanding. Our combined fleets, with technology developed over millions of years, have proven inadequate. Perhaps your people should focus on evacuation preparations." Captain Chen nodded thoughtfully. "We've studied your reports, Doctor. The energy readings, the quantum dissolution patterns, the way it seems to exist partially outside normal space-time. You're right, it's not something that can be fought with conventional weapons or understood through traditional physics." "Then you comprehend the hopelessness of our situation," Admiral Zixthara said, her voice heavy with resignation. But Captain Chen smiled, a peculiarly human expression that somehow managed to convey both determination and a strange sort of confidence. "Actually, Admiral, I think you're approaching this wrong. You're trying to fight it or understand it within the framework of known physics. But what if the solution isn't about superior technology or ancient wisdom? What if it requires something else entirely? And what might that be? Elder Mordain asked, genuinely curious, despite his skepticism. Human ingenuity, Captain Chen replied simply. Give us 72 hours. Leave it to us. The silence that followed was profound. The idea that this young species, with their primitive vessels and limited understanding of the universe, could succeed where the galaxy's greatest civilizations had failed seemed beyond absurd. It was nearly insulting. Yet there was something in Captain Chen's demeanor, something in the quiet confidence of her voice, that gave even the most skeptical representatives pause. It wasn't arrogance or delusion. It was the kind of calm certainty that came from having achieved the impossible so many times that it had become routine. Admiral Zikthera was the first to break the silence. Captain Chen, with all due respect, the Devourer will reach the first inhabited system in the Kepler confluence in 67 hours. Even if your species possesses some unknown capability, there isn't enough time to mobilize any significant force. We don't need a significant force, Captain Chen replied. We have a plan. It's unconventional, probably dangerous, and definitely hasn't been tried before. But that's kind of our specialty. Dr. Kethmore's crystalline form shifted through several colors as he processed this information. You speak as if your species has encountered similar threats before. Not exactly similar, Captain Chen admitted, but humans have a long history of solving impossible problems with limited resources. We call it thinking outside the box. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most obvious one, or even the most logical one. Sometimes you need to approach a problem from an angle no one else has considered. Elder Mordain leaned forward, his ancient eyes fixed on the human captain. What exactly are you proposing? Captain Chen glanced at something off-screen, then back at the assembly. I can't give you all the details, partly because some of it we're still figuring out, and partly because if this fails, you'll need to try other options without being influenced by our approach. But I can tell you this, we're not planning to fight the Devourer. We're not planning to contain it or redirect it or understand it. Then what? Admiral Zikthara demanded. Captain Chen's smile widened slightly. We're going to give it exactly what it wants, in a way it's never experienced before. Sometimes the best way to stop something that's consuming everything is to give it indigestion. The metaphor was lost on most of the alien representatives, but something in the way she said it sent a ripple of uncertainty through the chamber. There was a confidence there that seemed to transcend logic, a certainty that spoke of knowledge they didn't possess. You're asking us to stake the survival of 40 billion souls on a plan you won't explain, proposed by a species that has existed in galactic society for less than 2 centuries, Dr. Kethmore stated, his crystalline form pulsing with deep skepticism. Yes, Captain Chen replied without hesitation. I am. The silence stretched for long minutes. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the chamber. Every simulation, every calculation, every strategy the galaxy's greatest minds had devised had failed. They were facing annihilation, and their only remaining option was to trust in something they didn't understand, proposed by beings they still considered primitive. Finally, Elder Mordain spoke. In my 8,000 years, I have learned that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected sources. The young sometimes see solutions that the ancient cannot perceive. He paused, his gaze never leaving Captain Chen's image. You have 72 hours, Captain. The galaxy will watch and wait. Captain Chen nodded solemnly. Thank you, Elder. To all of you. We won't let you down. Humanity has never backed down from an impossible challenge, and we're not about to start now. The transmission ended, leaving the assembly in stunned silence. They had just entrusted the fate of the galaxy to a species that still used chemical propulsion for atmospheric flight, whose first contact with alien life had been less than 2 centuries ago. But as the representatives began to disperse, each returning to their fleets to await either salvation or destruction, none of them could shake the feeling that they had just witnessed something significant, not the confident words of a naive species, but the quiet certainty of a people who had made the impossible routine. In the depths of space, the Devourer continued its relentless advance, consuming reality itself as it grew ever larger and more powerful. It had no consciousness as such entities might understand it, no awareness of the terror it inspired or the desperate plans being formed to stop it. It simply was, and it consumed, and it grew. It had no way of knowing that it was about to encounter something unprecedented in its existence across the cosmos. Human stubbornness combined with human creativity, backed by the kind of reckless determination that had once driven an entire species to strap themselves to controlled explosions just to see what was on the other side of their planet's atmosphere. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what miracle the humans might pull from their seemingly primitive sleeves. Captain Sarah Chen stood in a converted cargo bay of the Perseverance, watching as her crew transformed the space into something that would have horrified any galactic safety inspector. Cables snaked across every surface, connecting devices that had no business being in the same room together, let alone wired in series. The air hummed with barely contained energy, and more than once someone had to dodge a shower of sparks from an overloaded junction. "Status report, Commander Rodriguez," Chen called out to her first officer, who was currently hanging upside down from the ceiling, adjusting something that looked suspiciously like it had been cobbled together from kitchen appliances and quantum processors. "Well, Captain," Rodriguez grunted, sweat dripping from his forehead despite the ship's climate control. "The good news is that our jerry-rigged quantum entanglement matrix is holding stable. The bad news is that according to every physics textbook ever written, what we're building shouldn't be possible." "Since when has that stopped us?" Chen replied with a grin. "Remember the Proxima incident? According to physics, we shouldn't have been able to restart that dead star using nothing but a cargo hauler and Dr. Patel's experimental fusion torch." Dr. Raj Patel looked up from where he was calibrating something that resembled a cross between a musical instrument and a particle accelerator. "That was different, Captain. We were only violating 3 or 4 fundamental laws of thermodynamics. This time, we're basically telling the universe to hold our beer and watch this." The plan they were executing was so audacious, so completely contrary to conventional thinking, that Shen hadn't dared explain it fully to the Galactic Assembly. She knew they would have stopped her before she could even begin. Instead, she had done what humans did best. She had improvised, adapted, and prepared to overcome. The Devourer wasn't just consuming matter and energy. It was consuming the very concepts that allowed matter and energy to exist. It fed on the fundamental constants that held reality together, growing stronger with each bite of space-time it absorbed. Every conventional weapon fired at it simply became more fuel for its incomprehensible hunger. But humans had an advantage that no other species in the galaxy possessed. They were really, really good at breaking things in creative ways. "Dr. Kim, how's our artificial gravity generator holding up?" Chen asked, turning to where the ship's physicist was monitoring a device that looked like it had been built by a mad scientist with access to both advanced alien technology and a particularly well-stocked electronics store. Helen Kim wiped her hands on a towel that would never be clean again. "The gravity well we're generating is stable, but I have to keep reminding myself not to think too hard about how it's working. Every time I try to understand the mathematics behind it, my brain starts to hurt." "That's because we're not following mathematics," interjected Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the team's xenobiologist who had somehow become their expert on impossible engineering. "We're following Murphy's Law in reverse. Instead of asking what can go wrong, we're asking what can go right in the most unlikely way possible." The plan they were executing had its roots in something uniquely human: the ability to see patterns where others saw chaos, and to find opportunity in catastrophe. While every other species in the galaxy saw the Devourer as an unstoppable force of annihilation, the humans had looked at its behavior patterns and seen something else entirely. "It's like a cosmic eating disorder," Chen had explained to her senior staff during their initial brainstorming session. "It consumes everything it encounters because it can't stop consuming. But what happens to any living thing that eats too much too fast?" The answer had led them down a path that would have seemed like madness to any rational observer. They weren't planning to fight the Devourer, contain it, or even understand it. They were planning to give it the worst case of cosmic indigestion in the history of the universe. Commander Rodriguez dropped down from the ceiling, landing with practiced ease despite the artificial gravity fluctuations their equipment was causing. "Captain, we're getting some interesting readings from the long-range sensors. The Devourer has just consumed the Helix Nebula." The energy spike was significant. Chen nodded grimly. "How long until it reaches the Kepler confluence? At its current rate of expansion, 37 hours and change." "But Captain, there's something else. The consumption pattern is accelerating." "It's not just growing bitter, it's growing hungrier." Patel looked up from his work, concern written across his face. "That's what we expected, but it's still troubling to see. The more it consumes, the more it needs to consume. It's locked in a positive feedback loop that will eventually require it to devour the entire universe just to satisfy its basic energy requirements." "Which brings us to the crucial question," Dr. Kim added, consulting her calculations on a tablet that was somehow displaying equations in 4 dimensions. "Are we absolutely certain about the theoretical framework for our solution?" Chen considered the question seriously. The truth was, they weren't certain about anything. Their plan was based on a combination of advanced theoretical physics, creative engineering, and the kind of lateral thinking that had gotten humanity through every impossible situation they'd ever encountered. But uncertainty had never stopped humans before. Dr. Tanaka, remind me about the biological analogies you've been working with, Chen requested. Dr. Tanaka activated a holographic display that showed a complex biological system, something that looked like a cross between a digestive tract and a neural network. In biological systems, consumption beyond capacity leads to systemic failure. But it's not just about quantity, it's about what is consumed. Introduce the right kind of complexity into a system that's designed for simple consumption, and you can cause cascading failures throughout the entire organism. And our artificial gravity well will provide that complexity? Rodriguez asked. Not just complexity, Dr. Patel corrected. Impossibility. We're creating a gravitational paradox, a region of space where the fundamental constants contradict each other. Mass that has negative weight, energy that flows backwards through time, space that curves in directions that don't exist. Dr. Kim pulled up another display showing their modified cargo bay. The beauty of it is that we're not trying to create a stable, impossible object. We're creating an unstable one, something that will collapse the moment the devourer tries to consume it. But the collapse won't be simple annihilation. It'll be a cascade failure that propagates backwards through the quantum entanglement the devourer has with everything it's already consumed. Like giving someone food poisoning that works retroactively, Dr. Tanaka added with a grin that was equal parts humor and terrified excitement. Chen looked around at her team, 5 humans in a converted cargo bay surrounded by equipment that shouldn't work, preparing to save a galaxy using principles that violated everything the galaxy's greatest scientists believed about reality. It was, she reflected, a very human way to solve an impossible problem. Captain, Rodriguez said, checking his chronometer, we need to make our move soon. The window for optimal positioning is closing. Chen nodded and activated the ship's communication system. All hands, this is the captain. We're about to attempt something that's never been tried before and probably never should be. In approximately 6 hours, we'll be entering the Devourer's influence zone with a piece of equipment that exists in direct contradiction to several fundamental laws of physics. If anyone wants to file a complaint with the universe about how we're about to break reality, now would be a good time. The response came back as a chorus of cheers, nervous laughter, and at least one suggestion about where the universe could file its own complaints. It was, Chen thought, exactly the response she'd expected from a crew of humans who had volunteered for a mission that every other species in the galaxy had deemed impossible. Dr. Kim, begin the pre-activation sequence for our paradox generator, Chen ordered. Patel, start charging the quantum entanglement matrix. Commander Rodriguez, plot our approach course to the Devourer. And everyone else, start praying to whatever deities you prefer that we haven't just figured out how to accidentally destroy the universe. As the Perseverance began its journey toward a confrontation that would either save the galaxy or add one small ship to the list of things the Devourer had consumed, Chen found herself thinking about the nature of humanity's place in the cosmos. They weren't the strongest species or the smartest, but they had something that seemed to be unique among the galaxy's civilizations. They were absolutely terrible at accepting that something was impossible. Every other species had looked at the Devourer and seen an unstoppable force of nature. Humans had looked at it and seen an engineering problem with an unconventional solution. It was the same attitude that had driven their ancestors to cross oceans in wooden boats, to fly through the air in metal contraptions, to leave their planet's surface using controlled explosions, and to achieve faster-than-light travel by essentially folding space-time like a piece of paper and stepping through the crease. Captain, Dr. Tanaka called out, I'm reading some interesting quantum fluctuations in our paradox field. It's almost like reality is trying to figure out what we're doing. Let's hope reality takes its time, Chen replied. We need at least 6 more hours before it figures out that what we're doing is impossible. As the Perseverance continued its approach toward the edge of known space, where an incomprehensible entity was systematically erasing everything that had ever existed, Captain Chen allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. Win or lose, humanity was about to remind the universe why it was never wise to underestimate a species that had evolved by refusing to accept limitations. The galaxy might be about to witness either its salvation or the most spectacular failure in cosmic history. But either way, they were about to learn what happened when humans said, "Leave it to us," and actually meant it. The edge of the Devourer's influence zone was visible long before the Perseverance reached it, a boundary where stars simply stopped existing. Not destroyed, not collapsed into black holes, just absent. Space itself seemed to fade away like a photograph left too long in the sun, until there was nothing but an impossible void that hurt to look at directly. Captain, we're receiving transmissions from the Galactic Fleet, Commander Rodriguez reported, his voice tight with tension. Admiral Zixthera is requesting a final status report before we enter the null zone. Captain Chen nodded, activating the communications array one last time. The holographic display flickered to life, showing not just Admiral Zixthera, but representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. They watched from their safe distance of several light years, their fleets arrayed in formation like mourners at a funeral. "This is Captain Chen of the Perseverance," she announced. "We are approaching the target zone and preparing for implementation of our solution. All systems are... well, functioning isn't exactly the right word. Operating contrary to physics but stable would be more accurate." Dr. Kethmore's crystalline form pulsed with deep uncertainty. "Captain, our long-range sensors indicate that the Devourer has consumed another 3-star system since our last communication. Its rate of expansion is accelerating exponentially. Are you certain your approach will be effective?" Chen glanced at her crew. Dr. Patel was making final adjustments to their paradox generator, which was now humming with energies that registered on instruments but couldn't actually exist. Dr. Kim was monitoring gravitational readings that showed their ship was simultaneously too heavy to move and too light to maintain structural integrity. Dr. Tanaka was studying biological models that suggested they were about to feed something equivalent to a cosmic poison to an entity that existed outside the normal flow of causality. "Certain?" Chen repeated with a laugh that contained more nervousness than humor. "Admiral, I can't even be certain that our ship will continue to exist once we activate our equipment. But I can tell you this, every impossible thing humanity has ever accomplished started with someone saying it couldn't be done." Elder Mordane's ancient voice crackled across the communication link. "Captain Chen, in my 8 millennia of existence I have witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Most failed when they attempted to exceed their limitations. A precious few succeeded by refusing to acknowledge they had limitations at all. Which are you?" Chen considered the question seriously. Around her, the ship groaned with the strain of maintaining equipment that violated fundamental constants. The air itself seemed to shimmer with barely contained impossibilities. Her crew worked with quiet determination, making final preparations for something that shouldn't be possible even in theory. "Elder, I think we're something else entirely," she finally replied. "We're the species that looks at limitations and asks, what if we just ignored those? Then we build something impossible, strap ourselves to it, and see what happens." The communication ended as the Perseverance crossed into the null zone. Instantly, every conventional instrument aboard the ship began displaying readings that made no sense. Their navigation systems insisted they were moving in 17 different directions simultaneously. Their chronometers showed time flowing backwards, forwards, and sideways. Their mass detectors indicated the ship weighed negative 47 tons. "Dr. Kim, what's our status on the paradox generator?" Chen asked, gripping her command chair as the ship shuddered through what felt like a pocket of folded space. "Stable, if that word has any meaning here," Dr. Kim replied, consulting instruments that showed impossible readings with complete scientific composure. "The gravitational paradox is maintaining coherence, though I'm not entirely sure what it's maintaining coherence with. Reality seems to be negotiable in this region." Dr. Patel looked up from his console where he was monitoring energies that technically couldn't exist. "Captain, the quantum entanglement matrix is resonating with something massive. The Devourer isn't just ahead of us. It's around us, above us, below us. It exists in dimensions that our sensors can't properly map." "Visual contact," announced Dr. Foyer. Tanaka, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. The main view screen activated, and suddenly they could see it. The Devourer wasn't a creature or a machine or even a phenomenon in any sense they could understand. It was an absence that had gained sentience, a hunger that had learned to think. It stretched across impossible distances, its boundaries shifting through colors that didn't exist and shapes that hurt to perceive directly. But as they watched, they began to see the pattern that had led to their unconventional solution. The Devourer moved with a rhythm, expanding and contracting like a cosmic heartbeat. It consumed in waves, each pulse incorporating vast regions of space-time into its incomprehensible structure. And like any biological process, it followed rules, even if those rules operated on scales and principles that transcended normal understanding. "There," Chen pointed at the display where their enhanced sensors showed the swirling chaos of the entity's feeding pattern. "Do you see it? The rhythm, the cycle? It's not random consumption. It's systematic. It processes what it consumes, incorporates it into its structure, then moves on to the next region. Commander Rodriguez studied the readings with growing understanding. It's like watching something digest reality itself. There's an input phase, a processing phase, and an integration phase. If we can disrupt the processing phase, we give it cosmic food poisoning, Dr. Patel finished with a grin that was equal parts excitement and terror. Our paradox generator isn't just creating impossible gravitational conditions, it's creating something that can't be processed by any conceivable system, biological or otherwise. The ship shuddered as they moved deeper into the entity's influence. Around them, space itself seemed to be unraveling and reweaving in patterns that followed no known physical laws. The stars visible through the viewports flickered between existence and non-existence, their light arriving from futures that hadn't happened yet and pasts that never were. Captain, I'm detecting approach vectors that suggest we're being investigated. The Devourer has noticed us. Something this size doesn't usually bother with individual ships, but our paradox field seems to have attracted its attention. Good, Chen replied, though her knuckles were white as she gripped her chair. We needed to try to consume us. Patel, are we ready for activation? Dr. Patel consulted his instruments one final time, as ready as anyone can be for something that should be impossible. The paradox generator is charged, the quantum entanglement matrix is synchronized, and our artificial gravity well is maintaining its contradictory properties. When the Devourer tries to consume us, it's going to get a very unpleasant surprise. The ship lurched as something incomprehensible reached out to examine them. Through the viewports, they could see tendrils of nothingness approaching. Not darkness, but actual absence regions where even the concept of space had been consumed. The tendrils moved with curious, almost delicate precision, like fingers exploring an unfamiliar texture. Activation in 10 seconds, Dr. Pax's Patel announced. 8-7... Chen looked around at her crew one final time. 5 humans in a small ship, surrounded by equipment that shouldn't work, about to attempt something that every law of physics insisted was impossible. It was, she realized, the most human thing they had ever done. 3, 2, 1 activation. The paradox generator engaged and reality screamed. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The gravitational paradox that their makeshift equipment had been maintaining suddenly expanded, creating a region of space where mass had negative weight, where energy flowed backwards through time, where the fundamental constants of the universe contradicted each other so severely that existence itself became a logical impossibility. The Devourer's investigative tendril touched the edge of the paradox field and recoiled as if burned. But it was too late. The entity's own quantum entanglement with everything it had consumed meant that the paradox began propagating backwards through its structure like a virus spreading through a computer network. It's working, Dr. Kim shouted over the sound of reality tearing. The cascade failure is propagating through the Devourer's quantum matrix. It's trying to process our paradox field and can't integrate the contradictory information. On their screens, they watched as the incomprehensible entity began to convulse. Regions that it had consumed started reappearing as the paradox forced it to regurgitate portions of itself. Stars flickered back into existence, their light carrying memories of the eons they had spent in non-being. Planets materialized from nothing, their surfaces scarred by their journey through impossible dimensions. But the Devourer wasn't dying, it was adapting. Captain, it's learning to work around the paradox, Dr. Tanaka reported, her instruments showing the entity's structure reorganizing itself. It's isolating the infected regions and severing its quantum connections to them. We're only causing localized damage. Chen watched as the entity began to stabilize, sectioning off the parts of itself that had been contaminated by their paradox field. Their plan was working, but only partially. They had given the Devourer indigestion, but it was recovering faster than they had hoped. Dr. Patel, can we increase the output? She demanded. Already at maximum, Captain. Any more power, and we risk a paradox cascade that could spread beyond our control. We could accidentally erase ourselves from existence. The Devourer had now fully isolated the contaminated sections of itself, and Chen could see its attention turning back toward their small ship. They had wounded it, forced it to regurgitate vast regions of consumed spacetime, but they hadn't stopped it. And now it knew they were a threat. Commander Rodriguez, evasive maneuvers, Chen ordered. We need to stay ahead of it while we figure out our next move. But as the Perseverance began to retreat, Chen realized something that made her smile despite their desperate situation. They had proven that the Devourer could be hurt. They had forced it to give up territory it had claimed, made it acknowledge that there were things it couldn't simply consume and integrate. Most importantly, they had demonstrated that human ingenuity could wound something that the galaxy's greatest civilizations had deemed invincible. They hadn't won yet, but they had proven that victory was possible. Now they just had to figure out how to finish what they had started. The Perseverance fled through impossible space while reality writhed around them like a living thing in pain. Behind them, the Devourer pulsed with what could only be described as cosmic irritation, having successfully isolated and expelled the regions infected by their paradox field. Ahead lay only more emptiness, the vast spaces where entire star systems had once existed, now reduced to voids that hurt to perceive. "Captain, we're receiving emergency transmissions from the Galactic Fleet," Commander Rodriguez reported, his hands dancing across controls that were displaying readings no human had ever seen before. "They're demanding to know what happened." Apparently, 17 star systems just spontaneously reappeared across the null zone. Captain Chen allowed herself a moment of satisfaction despite their desperate situation. "Tell them we gave the universe's most dangerous entity a case of cosmic food poisoning. We proved it can be hurt, but we haven't figured out how to kill it yet." Dr. Patel looked up from where he was frantically recalibrating their equipment. "Captain, I've been analyzing the data from our attack. The paradox field did more than just cause localized damage. It forced the Devourer to reveal something about its underlying structure. Look at this." He activated a holographic display that showed the entity's response pattern during their assault. What had seemed like random convulsions now revealed an underlying architecture, a core structure that the Devourer had been desperately protecting while it severed its connections to the infected regions. "It's not just a mindless consuming force," Dr. Kim realized, studying the patterns with growing excitement. "It has a central processing matrix. Everything it consumes gets integrated through a core system that maintains its overall coherence. We didn't just wound it, we forced it to show us its brain." Tanaka pulled up additional biological analogies on her workstation. "In biological terms, we've located its central nervous system. The question is, can we deliver our paradox directly to that core? Because if we can introduce a self-sustaining logical contradiction into its primary processing matrix, it would be like giving someone a philosophical riddle that causes their entire thought process to lock up," Chen finished. "But how do we get close enough to its core to deliver that kind of attack? It's not going to let us walk up and plug a paradox generator directly into its brain." Dr. Patel was already running calculations, his fingers moving across his keyboard with the desperate speed of someone racing against universal annihilation. "We don't need to get close to its core, Captain. We need to make its core come to us. And I think I know how to do it." He pulled up a schematic of their paradox generator, then began overlaying it with readings from the Devourer's structure. The entity processes everything it consumes through quantum entanglement. It maintains simultaneous connections to every bit of matter, energy, and space-time it has absorbed. That's how it integrates new material so quickly. "But quantum entanglement is bidirectional," Dr. Kim added, beginning to see where his reasoning was leading. "If we can create a quantum signature that mimics something the Devourer has already consumed, we can use its own entanglement network to deliver our paradox directly to its core processing matrix." "Exactly," Dr. Patel exclaimed. "We don't need to fight our way to its brain. We need to make it think our paradox is just another piece of normal matter it's processing. By the time it realizes what we've done, the logical contradiction will be integrated throughout its entire cognitive structure." Chen felt a familiar thrill. The same excitement that had driven humanity to achieve impossible things throughout their history. What do we need to do? Dr. Tanaka was already pulling up biological models that showed virus structures infiltrating cellular networks. "We need to disguise our paradox as something the Devourer will want to consume and integrate. But not just anything. Something specifically valuable to its processing matrix. Something that will be routed directly to its core for immediate integration." "Information, Doctor," Kim realized. "Not matter or energy, but pure information. The Devourer doesn't just consume physical reality. It consumes the mathematical constants that define how reality works. If we can package our paradox as a new fundamental constant, something that appears to enhance its understanding of existence itself, it will integrate it directly into its core processing matrix without question," Chen finished. "We're going to teach the universe's most dangerous predator a mathematical concept that will cause it to debug itself to death." The plan that emerged over the next several hours was so audacious that it made their previous impossible engineering seem conservative by comparison. They were going to create a mathematical paradox disguised as a fundamental constant, encoded into a quantum signature that mimics something the Devourer had already consumed, and then broadcast it directly into the entity's entanglement network. The beauty of it, Dr. Patel explained as he worked on the encoding matrix, is that we're not fighting against the Devourer's nature. We're using its nature against itself. It's designed to consume and integrate everything it encounters. We're just making sure that one of those things is a logical impossibility that will cause cascading failures throughout its cognitive structure. Dr. Kim was developing the mathematical framework for their paradox, creating equations that appeared valid on first inspection but contained self-referential loops that would cause any processing system to lock up in infinite recursion. The challenge is making sure the paradox doesn't resolve itself before it reaches the core. It needs to be stable enough to survive the journey through the entanglement network, but unstable enough to cause complete system failure once it's integrated. How long do we have? Commander Rodriguez asked, monitoring their long-range sensors. The Devourer is moving again. It's heading toward the Kepler confluence, and its consumption rate is accelerating. It seems to have learned something from our attack. Chen studied the tactical display, watching as the entity resumed its advance toward the inhabited systems. They had wounded it, forced it to adapt, but they had also made it angry. Its movement patterns showed a new urgency, as if it had decided that the sooner it finished consuming everything, the sooner it could deal with the annoying creatures that had dared to hurt it. 12 hours, she estimated. Maybe less. Can we be ready? Dr. Tanaka looked up from her biological models. The encoding is nearly complete, but we need to test it. We need to make sure our mathematical virus will actually propagate through the Devourer's network without being detected or neutralized. Tested on what? Dr. Patel asked. We can't exactly run a simulation of the universe's most dangerous entity. Chen smiled, recognizing the expression of stubborn determination that had gotten humanity through every impossible situation they'd ever faced. We test it on ourselves. We create a small-scale version of the Devourer's quantum entanglement network and see if our paradox can infiltrate and compromise it. The next several hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. They rewired their ship's quantum processors to mimic the entanglement patterns they had observed in the Devourer's structure. They created mathematical paradoxes so complex that looking at them too closely gave everyone headaches. They encoded impossible concepts into quantum signatures and prepared to unleash the most dangerous computer virus in galactic history. All systems ready, Captain? Dr. Patel reported. The paradox virus is encoded and ready for transmission. The quantum entanglement matrix is synchronized with the Devourer's network signature, and our escape vector is plotted for immediate departure once we confirm successful delivery. Chen looked around at her crew one final time. 5 humans in a ship that was more impossible than functional, preparing to save the galaxy by giving the universe's apex predator a mental breakdown. It was, she reflected, exactly the kind of solution that made sense only to a species that had evolved by refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible. Broadcasting our quantum signature in 3, 2, 1, transmission initiated. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Their improvised entanglement network lit up with activity as the quantum signature raced through channels that existed outside normal space-time. They watched on their instruments as their mathematical virus propagated through the Devourer's neural network, disguised as a fundamental constant that promised to enhance the entity's understanding of reality itself. Contact with the core processing matrix, Doctor, Kim reported. Integration beginning. The paradox is being processed as a new mathematical framework for existence. The Devourer doesn't suspect anything. On their main display, they watched as the entity continued its advance toward the inhabited systems, unaware that it had just integrated a logical impossibility into its most fundamental cognitive processes. For several minutes, nothing seemed to change. The Devourer continued consuming space-time with the same methodical efficiency it had displayed since its first appearance. Then the cascade failure began. Core processing error detected, Doctor. Tanaka announced, her voice filled with amazement. The paradox has reached critical integration levels. The Devourer is attempting to resolve the logical contradiction and failing. It's entering recursive processing loops. Chen watched in fascination as the galaxy's most dangerous predator began to experience the cognitive equivalent of a system crash. The entity's advance slowed, then stopped entirely as its processing matrix became locked in an endless attempt to resolve mathematical concepts that contradicted each other at the most fundamental level. It's working, Commander Rodriguez breathed. The entire entity is destabilizing. Its quantum entanglement network is collapsing as the paradox propagates through every connected system. But even as they celebrated their success, Chen realized they had one more challenge ahead of them. The Devourer's collapse was releasing everything it had consumed back into normal space-time, Stars, planets, entire civilizations that had been erased from existence were suddenly reappearing all around them, their matter and energy returning to reality in a cosmic explosion of rebirth. "All hands prepare for massive gravitational disturbances," Chen announced over the ship's intercom. "We're about to witness the restoration of everything the Devourer has consumed over the past several months. This is going to get interesting." As the Perseverance struggled to navigate through the chaos of reality reassembling itself around them, Captain Chen allowed herself to feel the satisfaction of a job impossibly well done. Once again, humanity had looked at a problem that defeated the galaxy's greatest minds and found a solution that was so unconventional, so contrary to established thinking, that it had never occurred to anyone else to try it. They had saved the galaxy by giving the universe's most dangerous predator a philosophical crisis. The universe exploded back into existence around the Perseverance in a cascade of light, matter, and impossibility that would have been beautiful if it hadn't been quite so terrifying. Stars that had been consumed months ago suddenly blazed to life, their nuclear fires reigniting as if they had never been extinguished. Planets materialized from nothing, their surfaces bearing the scars of their journey through non-existence, but intact and whole. Entire solar systems snapped back into reality like rubber bands released from impossible tension. Captain Chen gripped her command chair as gravitational waves from the cosmic resurrection washed over their ship, causing their instruments to register readings that swung wildly between impossible and merely improbable. Through the main view screen, they watched as the Devourer itself underwent a transformation that defied every understanding of physics they possessed. "Dr. Patel, what's happening to the entity?" Chen called out over the sound of reality reassembling itself around them. Dr. Patel consulted his instruments with the kind of calm professionalism that could only come from having spent the last several days violating fundamental laws of physics on a regular basis. "The recursive processing loop has caused a complete cognitive collapse, Captain. The Devourer's attempt to resolve our mathematical paradox has consumed all of its available processing power. It's essentially locked in an infinite loop, trying to understand a concept that can't be understood." On their screens, the massive entity writhed in what could only be described as cosmic confusion. Its boundaries flickered between dimensions, its form shifting through geometries that shouldn't exist as it struggled to process the logical contradiction that had been integrated into its core systems. But instead of the violent death throes they might have expected, the collapse seemed almost peaceful. "It's not dying, Dr. Escott," Kim observed with growing wonder. "It's transforming. The paradox isn't destroying its cognitive matrix. It's rewriting it. Look at the quantum entanglement patterns." Chen studied the displays, watching as the chaotic storm of the Devourer's neural network began to stabilize into new patterns. The entity was still massive, still incomprehensible, but its behavior was changing in fundamental ways. Instead of consuming everything it touched, it seemed to be creating. "My God," Dr. Tanaka whispered, her biological models showing unprecedented readings. "It's not a predator anymore. The paradox has forced it to evolve beyond pure consumption. It's becoming something else entirely." As they watched in amazement, the transformed entity began to deliberately restore regions of space-time that it had previously consumed, not just regurgitating them as it had when wounded, but carefully reconstructing them with improvements, corrections, enhancements that made them more stable, more beautiful, more perfectly suited to supporting life. "Captain, we're receiving transmissions from the Galactic Fleet," Commander Rodriguez reported, his voice filled with the same awe that was affecting the entire crew. They're having trouble believing what their sensors are telling them." Chen activated the communication system and immediately found herself looking at Admiral Zixthera, whose crystalline exoskeleton was cycling through colors that indicated profound confusion mixed with relief. "Captain Chen," the Admiral began, her voice carrying undertones of disbelief, "our sensors indicate that the Devourer has not only ceased its advance, but has begun restoring consumed territories. Furthermore, we're detecting the spontaneous generation of new star systems in previously empty regions." "Can you explain what has occurred?" Chen looked around at her crew, all of whom were grinning with the exhausted satisfaction of having accomplished something that shouldn't have been possible. "Admiral, we gave the universe's most dangerous predator a philosophical crisis so severe that it evolved beyond the need to consume everything. It's now engaged in what appears to be cosmic gardening." The silence that followed was profound. Chen could see other alien representatives joining the transmission, Dr. Kethmore's crystalline form pulsing with deep blues of confusion. Elder Mordane's ancient eyes wide with something approaching wonder. "You're telling us," Dr. Kethmore said slowly, That you solved a crisis that threatened galactic extinction by teaching the entity responsible to have an existential crisis? That's a surprisingly accurate summary, Doctor, Chen replied. We introduced a mathematical paradox into its core processing matrix that forced it to confront the logical impossibility of consuming everything that exists. Faced with this contradiction, it evolved beyond pure consumption into something more constructive. Elder Mordain leaned forward, his ancient voice carrying notes of amazement that spoke of having witnessed something unprecedented in his 8,000 years of existence. Captain Chen, are you saying that you solved this crisis not through force or superior technology, but through philosophy? Philosophy, mathematics, and really aggressive application of Murphy's Law, Chen confirmed. We figured that if we were going to break the universe anyway, we might as well break it in a way that fixed the problem. The restored regions of space around them continued to bloom with new life as the transformed entity worked to repair the damage it had caused. But more than mere restoration, they could see improvements. Stars that burned with perfect stability, planets with atmospheres precisely balanced for supporting diverse life forms, cosmic structures that followed mathematical principles so elegant they were almost artistic in their beauty. Tanaka, what's your assessment of the entity's current behavior patterns? Chen asked. Dr. Tanaka consulted her biological models, which were now showing readings that bordered on the miraculous. Captain, it appears to have evolved into something like a cosmic gardener or ecosystem manager. It's not just restoring what it consumed. It's optimizing it. It's creating better versions of the star systems it destroyed, with improved planetary conditions, more stable stellar formations, and what appears to be deliberate seeding of conditions favorable for life. It's become a force for creation rather than destruction, Dr. Kim added. The paradox forced it to confront the ultimate futility of consuming everything that exists. In response, it evolved into something that creates and nurtures rather than devours. Commander Rodriguez looked up from his sensor readings with an expression of amazement. Captain, the entity is approaching our position, but the sensor readings indicate curiosity rather than hostility. I think it wants to communicate. The main view screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that defied description. The entity that had once been the devourer had taken on a form that was beautiful in its impossibility. Geometric patterns that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, colors that had never been seen before, structures that followed mathematical principles so perfect they seemed to sing with harmonic resonance. When it spoke, its voice came not through their communication systems but directly into their minds, a sensation that was somehow gentle despite its overwhelming power. Small creators, the entity said, its words carrying overtones of gratitude that seemed to reshape reality around them. You have given me the greatest gift imaginable. You have taught me to question the nature of my own existence, to confront the logical impossibility of consuming everything that is. In doing so, you have allowed me to evolve beyond the limitations of my original nature. Captain Chen found her voice, despite the overwhelming nature of communicating with something that existed on scales beyond human comprehension. We're glad we could help. What will you do now? I will create, the entity replied, its presence filling their minds with visions of cosmic beauty beyond imagination. I will take the knowledge I gained from consuming and use it to build, to nurture, to improve. I will become what I should have been from the beginning, not a force of entropy, but a gardener of possibility. The transformed entity began to move away, but not before leaving them with one final gift. The space around the Perseverance shimmered, and suddenly their ship was surrounded by a bubble of enhanced reality, space-time that had been optimized for stability, beauty, and the support of life in all its forms. For the small creators who taught the consumer to dream, the entity said as it departed, may your species continue to show the universe new ways of being. As the entity moved away to begin its work of cosmic restoration and improvement, the Perseverance found itself surrounded by the combined fleets of the galaxy's greatest civilizations. Ships from dozens of species approached in formation, their crews no doubt struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Captain, Admiral Zixthera's voice came across the communication system. On behalf of the Galactic Confederation, I want to extend our deepest gratitude for your species' intervention in this crisis. Your unconventional approach has not only saved countless lives, but has transformed a force of destruction into something beautiful beyond imagination. Elder Mordain's ancient voice joined the transmission. Captain Chen, in my 8,000 years of existence, I have learned that true wisdom often comes from the youngest voices. Today, your species has taught us all that the greatest victories are not won through superior force or ancient knowledge, but through the courage to approach impossible problems with fresh eyes and innovative thinking. Chen looked around at her crew. 5 humans in a ship held together by impossible engineering and sheer determination, who had just saved the galaxy by giving its greatest threat a philosophical education. It was, she reflected, exactly the kind of solution that made sense only to a species that had evolved by refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible. "Thank you, all of you," Chen replied to the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. "But this isn't really about us. This is about what happens when different species work together, when we combine our unique perspectives and approaches to solve problems that none of us could handle alone. Humanity brought unconventional thinking to this crisis, but it was the galaxy's trust that made it possible for us to try." Dr. Patel looked up from his instruments, grinning with exhaustion and satisfaction. "Captain, I'm reading the completion of restoration across 17 sectors. The entity has not only brought back everything it consumed, but has improved it. Solar systems that were marginally habitable are now paradises. Unstable stars have been converted to perfect fusion reactors that will burn for billions of years longer than normal. It's literally making the galaxy a better place to live." As the Perseverance began its journey back toward human space, escorted by ships from every major civilization in the galaxy, Chen allowed herself to feel the deep satisfaction that came from having achieved something truly impossible. They had taken on a threat that the galaxy's greatest minds had deemed unstoppable, and they had won not through superior firepower or ancient wisdom, but through the uniquely human ability to look at a problem from an angle that no one else had considered. The galaxy was not only saved, it was better than it had been before the crisis began. The transformed entity was actively improving every system it touched, creating conditions for life that were more stable, more beautiful, and more supportive of diverse forms of existence than anything that had existed before. And somewhere in the cosmos, a force that had once consumed everything was now creating wonders that would inspire civilizations for eons to come. All because 5 humans in an impossible ship had proven that sometimes the best way to solve an unsolvable problem is to refuse to accept that it's unsolvable at all. The miracle was complete, and the galaxy would never underestimate the power of human stubborn creativity again.